B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, January 24th, 2020. Happy birthday to my stepson, David. Creeping into his mid-30s. He hits 35 today. Well, good news and predictable bad news for Bernie Sanders supporters. The senator from Vermont has pulled into a commanding lead in the latest New Hampshire poll. This one from WBUR, the Boston station. It shows Bernie at 29%. And the next candidate is Pete Buttigieg at 17%. Joe Biden checks in at 14%, and Elizabeth Warren at 13%. So it appears that the attacks on Sanders are actually strengthening his support, including the wave of assaults that started with Elizabeth Warren's and her team's leak of the claims to CNN that Bernie had said that a woman couldn't win the presidency in 2020. So this is very encouraging. It is well-timed. You never want to peak too early. And, of course, here comes the corporate media to try to be the gatekeeper. And in a fascinating piece in today's Washington Post, headline, Sanders supporters have weaponized Facebook to spread angry memes about his Democratic rivals. And they even go so far as to say that Sanders supporters' dominance on Facebook, quote, is using a popular new mass posting technique that allows ordinary Americans to operate with rapid-fire speed reminiscent of Russian bots and trolls in 2016. And those allegations have never been proven, but they've taken hold in the consciousness after waves of propaganda from corporate media outlets like the Washington Post. And they focus on a man named a Democrat in Michigan whose name is Matt Walters, a retired factory worker, age 64. And they say that, he picked up a Facebook meme, and then he reposted it and used techniques that used Facebook groups. Walters calls it a force multiplier, and this reaches more people. And later, the Washington Post reports, since the beginning of 2019, nearly 3,000 active Facebook pages supporting Sanders have generated more than 290 million interactions. Now, that is a remarkable multiplier. But there's nothing sinister about it. They are simply using Facebook more effectively than Joe Biden, who has a mere 9 million interactions. Elizabeth Warren is more active at 20 million. And so they're trying to suggest something sinister here. And maybe there is something, but so far I can't see it. Now, with this massive echo chamber on Facebook, it is fair to say that the nasty messages, including Elizabeth Warren seen behind a mask of Hillary Clinton, the uses of snakes and other imagery to denounce Warren for her attacks on Sanders, I don't condone those underhanded messages. But these are not coming from the Sanders campaign. These are individuals who are outraged at what Elizabeth Warren did. And so far, the polling reflects that Warren's attacks have backfired. Another quote from the article, the pro-Sanders users appear deeply linked. Top 72 users engaged in simultaneously posting, broadly circulating the same content in a single second. They have an average of 41 direct connections to others in the same universe of groups. All right. You got to mention the Russians? And they write about one 69-year-old woman from New York City who posts to Jews for Bernie. She ended up in Facebook jail after posting the meme showing Warren as a mask for Clinton. And so, this again just underscores that 2016 was a case where the Trump campaign made very effective use of Facebook, and the Clinton campaign didn't. They had David Brock out there running his own freelance rogue media operation, and they thought that would be enough. And Trump spent $82 million on Facebook, which would drown out anything that is alleged to have been posted, inserted, either virally or on a paid basis by Russians, including the troll farm in St. Petersburg. More good news for Sanders supporters. The Capitalist Tool, as Forbes magazine refers to itself, has published a poll aimed at 18 to 29-year-olds. And it shows that Sanders dominates with 32%. The closest second place is half of Bernie's support, Joe Biden at 16%, and it dropped sharply from there. Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg each have 9%. The youthful Andrew Yang pulls 8%. And if those people turn out for Bernie in the primaries, and if he's the nominee in the general, that can make the critical difference. And we were talking about Facebook a minute ago. One of my Facebook friends, Jay Cryer, posted a tweet from Joe Biden, and it tips his hand. He's trying to use it to contrast himself to Trump. And so Biden tweeted, on the anniversary of a hopeful moment, it's clear that Trump's Venezuela policy is a dead end. Millions are suffering with the Maduro regime still in power. So Joe Biden backs the imaginary president of Brazil, of Venezuela, and he states that he wants regime change. Just by referring to the elected Maduro government as a regime and lamenting that it is still in power. Here on the West Coast, we are tracking the declining and extinction of species, and one that is a powerful indicator is the monarch butterfly. And since the 1980s, that population has declined by 99%. But the good news, at least for the moment, is that when you compare the numbers of migrating western monarch butterflies this winter, who were counted, it's just slightly up from last year. And that is good news because the expectation was that it might drop precipitously close to zero this year. Yesterday, I touted my new interview with Whitney Webb from Mint Press News about the remarkable claims of the Iraqi prime minister, and this came from a full translation of a speech he gave to Parliament on January 5th. And I want to apologize to listeners because after I said I was going to post it, I got distracted and I didn't. But the interview is already posted right now, and you can catch up with it. I think it's a very important issue, and my argument is that Trump's bullying and threats to Iraq are far more sinister than the Ukraine scheme that he is currently on trial for in the impeachment effort in the United States Senate. But today in Baghdad, thousands, tens of thousands, marched at the urging of Muqtada al-Sadr, decrying U.S. influence and demanding that Washington withdraw its troops. One account I saw from a foreign newspaper was that as many as 2 million people are in the streets of Iraq today. Not so many in Washington, but it is the annual march of the pro-birth contingent, the so-called right-to-life people, the anti-abortion activists, and Trump as he methodically strokes his base to keep them in line and get them to ignore the evidence presented at the impeachment trial. Well, he is just methodically stroking that base, and he hit the evangelicals today with a pandering speech that is deeply hypocritical, and they don't care. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Ben Brotman, Patrick Garay, Polina Vasilev, and Mary Vaught. They all kick in $5, $10 a month, whatever you can afford. And I encourage you to join them because that's what pay the bills here. I just ordered a bunch of new ink to print out all these articles that I comment on. And so, if you can help out $5 or $10 a month, I'd appreciate it. All you have to do is drop in at peterbcollins.com, click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber, and you can take it from there. Now to my impeachment file for today. As you know, I try to watch as much as I can. Last night, I only got about 4 hours of viewing time on the impeachment proceedings. I do have a life. And I think most Americans are unable to watch the entire marathon, and that is the intent of the guy who controls the whole thing, Mitch McConnell. One of the unintended consequences is that Adam Schiff's final summation of the House manager's opening salvo against Trump will be in prime time tonight. It should hit at 8 or 9 Eastern, and so hopefully more people will see it. We'll talk about his performance last night in a moment. But this is interesting news and very well timed. The Justice Department has conceded to a secretive intelligence court, that's the unconstitutional FISA court, that the available evidence about Carter Page, the former Trump campaign advisor who was wiretapped by the FBI during the Russia investigation, was legally insufficient to justify the last several months of his continued surveillance in 2017. Now, this is well timed because the Justice Department, of course, is forced by the FISA court to admit this. The hearing actually occurred on January 7th, where this was aired out. But it was strategically released today so that the House managers on the Trump side, who will take over on Saturday when nobody will be watching, and they could continue into Monday and Tuesday if they use up all their time, I predict they will pounce heavily on this, and they will ignore the finding of the court that the original wiretap appeared to be based on sufficient evidence. But as the investigation went forward, they learned that Carter Page wasn't really a Russian agent. And so they had been wrong. And they didn't correct that information, so they started lying to the FISA court somewhere along the way in 90-day increments in late 2016 or early 2017. Now, as you know, I think there is no place for the FISA court in what's left of America's republic. We shouldn't have a secret court. And we know that agencies like the FBI and the CIA and the NSA have repeatedly lied to the FISA court judges, and the judges know it. But they keep up with the facade, the charade, that this is an important bulwark of our democracy, that we only spy on people with a court order. And we know that's bogus, but that's how it is. Well, this impeachment presentation by the Democrats has certainly been dominated by Adam Schiff. And I would say we are up Schiff Creek, and we wonder if the paddles will ever appear. So yesterday was interesting. I watched the opening and I watched the closing and I watched some in the middle. And the opening was Jerry Nadler, the rotund congressman from New York, who gave a pretty good law school lecture. And it was spiced up by the video clips of Trump and other people from the House hearings. And Nadler made some very good points. Impeachment is the Constitution's final answer to a president who mistakes himself for a king. Impeachment is not punishment for a crime. It exists to address threats to the political system. And he made a very strong case that what Trump is accused of is impeachable. And that's in Article 1. Today, they are taking up Article 2, the obstruction clause. And I think actually in their arguments for Article 1, they covered much of the ground that covers the obstruction element. And I know that if you tune in just here and there, it often seems quite repetitious, but that's what it takes to try to penetrate the locked minds of the Republican majority. So then we saw Sylvia Garcia, congresswoman from Texas. I believe she's a former judge. I found her presentation quite a snoozer. She went on for several hours. And her job was to prove that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden are as pure as the driven Ukraine snow. And she went into great detail showing how Joe Biden represented a polling threat to Trump's reelection prospects in 2020, and that he sicked Rudy Giuliani on this. But Sylvia Garcia went deep into Russiagate territory. And that's where they lose me. Because I think that was a pretty bad concoction. And then, based on the commentary of Fiona Hill in the early stages of House impeachment, she said that Trump's interest in investigating the Bidens in Ukraine, the CrowdStrike, and any other meddling in 2016 is based on Russian intelligence and Russian propaganda. She had a slide up there. Russia attacked our elections and blamed it on Ukraine. And then she quoted Putin, saying in October or so of 2019 that finally they're blaming Ukraine for meddling and not Russia. Well, as you know, my ears are deaf to those arguments, and I have seen no proof that this is a Russian propaganda projection. I think Trump did hear it from Putin, but I think Rudy Giuliani is the guy who really lit the burner under the Trump boiler. So that's where the Democrats stray from what I think is compelling and persuasive. Now, listening to Rush Limbaugh this morning briefly, he's really worked up over Nadler's presentation yesterday. And he said that Senator Collins from Maine sent an angry note to the Chief Justice saying, "You've got to stop Nadler. He is accusing Republican senators of being part of a cover-up if they don't vote for witnesses and evidence." And the Chief Justice, who is operating like a potted plant, I think the only worse person they could put in there to preside over these proceedings would be Steve Harvey, working out the family feud, right? Anyway, I think that is a good claim. I think it's a way of putting Susan Collins and Lamar Alexander on their heels. And they're both playing this the same way they always have. Oh, we're deliberating. Lamar Alexander is saying he won't vote on witnesses until the proper time, and that's after the senators have asked their questions. And that doesn't pass the fundamental bullshit test. But these are days where bullshit is in big supply in Washington, D.C. And one of the moments when Nadler was speaking, he put up a clip of Lindsey Graham, who was a member of the House and an impeachment manager during the Clinton impeachment back in 1999. And we hear a younger Lindsey Graham say, "What's a high crime? How about if an important person hurts somebody of low means? Doesn't have to be a crime. It's just when you start using your office and you're acting in a way that hurts people, you've committed a high crime." Well, I don't find that terribly persuasive, but it was so embarrassing that Lindsey Graham left the room moments before that clip was played. And, this is it's frustrating because every morning we see this goon swear them in and say that if they talk, they might go to jail and that they're also not allowed to leave. But we know many of them go out in the hallway and talk to Fox News. We know that others are doing crossword puzzles and people have left early, come late. And the Chief Justice, he's just watching. One of the other comments from Nadler, "The Constitution is not a suicide pact. It does not leave us stuck with presidents who abuse their power in unforeseen ways that threaten our security and democracy. Until recently, it didn't occur to me that our president would call a foreign leader and demand a sham investigation meant to kneecap his political opponents, all in exchange for releasing vital military aid that the president was already required by law to provide." Now, some of this, of course, is hyperbole, and some of it, I think, is quite accurate. And those who need to be persuaded, I think, are not interested in persuasion. So here's a little more from Sylvia Garcia. And when I heard her play out the whole, Biden set of arguments, and conclude that Biden has done nothing wrong, either one of them? I believe that's as credible as when Trump says that his call with Zelensky on July 25th was a perfect call. And Jake Tapper, who I don't consider to be a very courageous reporter, he even mentioned during one of the breaks after Sylvia Garcia made her presentation that she should have at least admitted that the Hunter Biden Burisma deal looks bad, or conceded, as Hunter has, that he only got it because his last name is Biden, and that he now recognizes in hindsight that it looked really bad. They could go a long way toward persuading people if they acknowledge the obvious. But when they defend the Bidens and Joe Biden's threat to withhold $1 billion of aid to Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor Shokin, I'm sorry, that's not a shining moment. And it does give huge openings to the Republicans to attack, and they will. So Adam Schiff gave a pretty powerful summation last night. I watched that entire piece. And then this morning I had MSNBC on, and they were comparing the speech to Atticus Finch. It wasn't that great. I mean, he hit some good points, and he was dramatic without being melodramatic. Does anybody really question whether the president is capable of what he's charged with? No one is really making the argument Donald Trump would never do such a thing, because, of course, we know that he would. And, of course, we know that he did. It's a somewhat different question, though, to ask, okay, it's pretty obvious, whether we can say it publicly or can't. We all know what we're dealing here with this president. And he made the case for removal. Even though it's an election year and voters will get to choose in November, he made a good case that Trump will continue to operate in a nefarious manner if he's permitted to stay in office. And let's see, his final closer was, no Constitution can protect us if right doesn't matter anymore. And you can't trust this president to do what's right for this country. You can trust he will do what's right for Donald Trump. So, not bad, but hardly Atticus Finch, in my humble opinion. This comment from the running coverage of the New York Times, headline, the witness at the top of Democrats' list isn't Bolton. They're saying that Mick Mulvaney is the guy who was at the center of much of this. And I think that the House managers made a good argument last night that the counsel to the National Security Council, whose name is Eisenberg, is a key witness because Fiona Hill went and complained to him. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman did. Tim Morrison did. Ambassador Taylor did. The woman named Williams, who works in Pence's office, the vice president's advisor, she went to Eisenberg. And I've always considered John Bolton to be an unpredictable wild card. We know what he did in the moment and that he was upset by the scheme that Trump was using Giuliani and Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman for. But it is risky because he is a movement conservative, a partisan extremist who supports much of Trump's policy agenda, except that he thinks is too weak. So this will continue to be an issue, and we know that there's only one shot after the 16 hours of questions from senators to the managers of each side. There will be a single vote about whether to have a vote to invite new witnesses and introduce evidence. And I don't see how that vote is going to peel off enough Republicans to make a difference. Oh, and Mike Pompeo is going to Ukraine next week to visit with Zelensky. Isn't that going to be fun? So we'll see how that plays out. And finally, Scott Ross, he ran a big video shop in San Francisco for many years. He put up a nice one on Facebook yesterday that I'll close with. Trump could shoot someone in the Senate and still get acquitted 53-47. Unless he shot a Republican, then it would be 52-47. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the place. It's on YouTube, and I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.